Sword Art Online has had a lot of games in its past, but being honest, most of them have never reached the potential of where the anime reached. And I wanted to share my thoughts about the game, as well as revisit some of these old games and see how they performed in the past. Just as a disclaimer, none of this footage is gameplay that I've captured. It will be a mix of footage that was officially released from the publisher and developer, and a really great video by Javian, who got a chance to play the game hands-on. Link to his video down in the description below. I'm going to try to keep this brief and short, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Echoes of Aincrad is. So it's sort of a refresh and a complete new entry into the series, where you don't play as the main character Kirito, but instead you will be going in making your own character at the start of the game, and you will be starting at the very start. So for those of you who've watched the anime, I'm sure you know you'll be spawning in the town of beginnings and going through the story of the 10,000 players that got stuck in this world. Now the cool thing is, you will be sort of living and experiencing the story alongside the events of the anime. So from the looks of it, Kirito and some other familiar faces will still be in the game, but Kirito will be more portrayed as the villain that everyone saw him for in the anime. I think this is a really cool approach because fans of the anime really appreciate the new angle and the extra lore that comes with it, but it's also great if you've never played any of the previous games or you've never even watched the anime. This is a great starting point for literally anyone, whatever point of experience you may have with the series. This game also has a much higher reported budget than all the other games and seems to be the first SAO game that actually has a proper budget. It's not quite AAA budget yet, but it's definitely at the higher end of the AA. The game will be focusing around floor 1 and 2, but we'll have tons of content focused on both floors. Now I know a lot of people were disappointed that it's not going to be all 100 floors, but realistically that would be very difficult to do while keeping the users engaged as well, because of course you can just kind of have 100 floors and all of them kind of feel the same or empty. And what's the point of having that? So these will be 2 floors, but really focused, tons of content packed into each floor. There's already some planned DLC coming out later in the year. And the developers have said that if the game does well, they will definitely expand on it with potentially a trilogy. I'm interested to see how this game does because going back all the way back to Hollow Realization, which peaked at about 3.2 thousand players, and for its owner estimates it's between 220 and 800,000. Now for Fatal Bullet, this I think was their most successful game, and I think a big reason for success was because you also got to create your character. This was the only game in the SAO series, other than this new Echoes of Aincrad coming out later in July, where you did not play as the main protagonist Kirito. You played alongside them, but you played your own character and kind of built out your own story. And I think that's a big part where the games really suffered, especially these last few games that we've been seeing. You know, we've been with Kirito and his story for over 10 years. You know, players want to experience that world without having to be stuck to playing as Kirito or any of the other familiar cast, really. And once again, that's why I think Echoes of Aincrad is going to do pretty well, because I think the world of Aincrad is a very interesting concept, and there's tons and tons of potential for all sorts of different stories to go on. But of course, if you're only seeing it from one perspective all the time, over and over and over for over 10 years, it's going to get a little bit worn off. But going back to Fatal Bullet, they saw a peak of 21.7k players, with owners' estimates going from 400 to 1.5 million. The next series was Sword Art Online Alicization Lycoris, which had a peak of about 8.6 thousand players and estimates of 155 to 320,000 owners. Sword Art Online Last Recollection was one of their poorest performing games, which only saw a peak of 1.8 thousand players and only about 16,000 to 47,000 owner estimates. And their most recent game being Sword Art Online Fractured Daydream, which focused on being this giant kind of multiplayer game where you take on these raid dungeons and fight these big bosses with all these players. I think it was up to 20 players. I personally only played in the open beta for this game. It just didn't really click to me, so I never really played after launch. And it peaked at 12.3 thousand players and then really quickly dropped off in about a month down to 1.8k. And that's where I also saw a lot of people complaining that queue time started getting really long. And I know they just recently making a lot of the multiplayer features available to be played as a single player mode, but I think it was a little bit late in its life cycle because it has been about a year and a half since it came out, and most players have dropped off, with seeing about a peak of 150 players in the last 24 hours on Steam, and for this game's owner estimates about 84 to 93,000. Now there's so much to talk about with Echoes of Aincrad, all the way from its world to the new stories that we've been seeing, to the new combat, and even some cool features like the permadeath mode that literally deletes your save if you die. And I'll definitely be using that mode to play the game for the first time. As a disclaimer, you do have to purchase the higher edition to unlock that mode from the very beginning. However, if you buy the normal edition of the game, you will still be able to unlock this mode later down the line. I think if the team behind Echoes of Aincrad is able to deliver a quality game, especially with these 2 floors being a little bit more narrow focused, a good story, and unique missions that don't feel repetitive, or open world activities that don't feel too repetitive, then I do think they stand a pretty good chance of success. If they're able to nail the progression, combat, and the feeling of going through the game and actually climbing from the first floor to the second floor, especially after the events of the first boss fight, which I won't spoil for story reasons, this could be the best SAO game, not only for fans, but for the series as a whole. After all the previous games though, fans should be cautiously optimistic. As always, as with most games, I believe you should be. However, it's okay to be looking forward to it. Let me know what you guys think about Echoes of Aincrad down below and what excites you most. Let's talk about it. There's so much to talk about and I'd love to chat with you guys more in the comments. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.